Hey, everybody, and welcome to Detections with your hosts, Understudy 77 and
Exiled Atreides.
And with us tonight, a very, very special guest. Some would say way back when we had Blind Hacker come on and chat. If he was part of the catalyst that kind of made Detections, we have the other catalyst here with us tonight. That's Mr. Jeff Mann.
Welcome,
Greetings.
Jeff.
Greetings. Hello, my name is Jeff.
That was very descriptive. So
Something about boots and Dora.
right? So as is customary, why not kick off like, Jeff, you're here, like, tell us a little bit about you. What makes you you?
I can do that. I have been in the what I call the information security field for almost 40 years now. I've gotten close enough to 40 that I just round up. Started back in the 80s with the Department of Defense. Spent my formative years at the National Security Agency, which is one of the reasons why people like to hang out with me, because they don't often get to meet, not yet alone talk to people that worked at NSA. I left there.
That's because they've all suddenly and mysteriously disappeared, right?
Well, there's that too. Many years ago, there was an article written by someone at the time that was a very respected InfoSec professional that was musing that people don't leave NSA; they're simply infiltrating private industry. So take that for what it is.
Fair.
I've been in private industry for almost 25 years. I left. Why I left NSA may come up in conversation tonight. I wasn't fired, but they were sure happy to see me go. Let's just put it like that for now.
You are a like historical button pusher of sorts, which is one of the reasons why we like you.
I am. But did a lot of pen testing, red teaming back in the day. We didn't call it red teaming back then, but I don't know when that term came about officially, but I always called it pen testing. And at some point, about 2004-ish, 2005-ish, I sort of hung up my pen testing hat, if you will, for two main reasons. One, because I was getting tired of going into companies, for repeat performances and breaking in and getting in the same way we had done the previous 6 months, the previous year ago. It occurred to me, gee, something's not working. They're not getting the message. They don't understand when we come in and say back in those days, it was getting root or getting a root shell, because it was mostly Unix back then. They didn't get that meant that we owned them, that we could do anything we wanted to, and the possibilities were endless in terms of pwnage, in terms of in their networks. So I decided to embark on what I actually think is a more difficult track, which is to actually try to communicate with the users and the managers and the C-level people within organizations and actually explain why they need to care about security, why they should care about security, and how they should do security in their environment in a way to, promote, if not just simply protect their business. The second reason simply was I was working with some younger guys, and I remember very distinctly we were on a job, and I found a bunch of Unix servers that were running X services. So I set up my little scripts to do screen captures and keystroke captures. And at some point I was comparing notes with the guy that I was with, a much younger guy. And he said, "Oh yeah, I saw that. I wrote a script and I'm capturing all of them." And so he had, written a script. I don't even know what he was writing in. It was probably Perl back in those days. But he had scripted it out, and he was capturing, keystrokes and credentials and God knows what off of about 90 servers in less time that I'd spent, just pecking around by hand, and said, "Okay, I'll leave it to these guys that are sharper at it. I can use my skill sets in other ways," which I have been told I'm a good communicator, and I have a rapport with people, believe it or not. And so I went down that path, and for penance, what I consider to be penance for having made that decision, very shortly after that, I fell into PCI. which was the end of 2004. And I've kind of been doing PCI ever since.
That sounds like penance.
I had a couple things here. So one, I think if anyone manages to talk to you in a smoking pit at a conference, they'll understand what you say about you communicating. But you said when you moved over to doing the compliance stuff that you thought it ended up being harder. Why is that?
Well, it wasn't compliance specifically that I thought was harder. It was actually communicating and getting people to understand this thing that we used to call InfoSec, now we call cybersecurity. Understanding why they shouldn't use common passwords rather than simply trying to, give them the once a year 20-minute video telling them how to pick a strong password and not really explaining the context. Trying to explain to C-level management why they needed to invest in technologies that would help them do security rather than simply, run the business and generate revenue. Why not even just from a compliance perspective, but from a security perspective, to protect their business, they needed to do these things. What I found, what I liked about PCI when I got into it, the very first time I read the PCI data security standard, I read it and said, wow, this makes sense. This is how you should build a security program. This is sort of at a high level, covers all the different areas of things that you should worry about if you're trying to build a security program. And the beauty of it is I was a QSA for about 10 years. It wasn't like any other compliance regiment or regulatory standard that I saw, where mostly it was just sort of a paper pushing exercise. Where the rubber hit the road, if you're doing PCI correctly, I'm not saying that people haven't figured out how to game the PCI system, but half of the PCI standard is, do you have written policies? Do you have standards that your systems are built off of? Do you have procedures that tell you how to do all the administrative operational things and the security activities? And then you have to sit down with them at their systems and look over their shoulder and say, show me how you're doing what you say you're doing on paper. And that's where it typically falls apart. But that's what I always liked about it. It's like, you can't fool me if you're showing it to me on the screen.
Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons that, and as you go through that story, one of the reasons that I think maybe why I get along with you so well is because when you really think about it, one of the things Exiles and I talk about a lot here is like that kind of challenging and breaking the norm, or what we've come to accept as standard within InfoSec. And then I think about it and I'm like, you know what, man, you've been doing that since I was a toddler. Yeah. And I can appreciate that. Like, you've been breaking the norm since long before the current norm existed. And I love that.
Well, and the depressing part is the norm hasn't changed a whole lot.
No, I was also going to say we're still having the same problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, like you talked about in pen testing how you were giving the same reports year over year, and then explaining how you're talking to people, and I'm like, I have those same conversations now with people trying to explain to executives about investing in technology and things like that. So.
Yep. Well, and in the so fast forward, it's been 7 years ago now. I was enticed over to the product side of the world. I went to work for Tenable Network Security, and one of my roles at Tenable was to go out and be an evangelist. The founder of the company, Ron Gula, happens to be an old friend of mine. We met at NSA, and in fact, we were part of the first red team at NSA, which is really my big claim to fame within our community, and why I'm in the Tribe of Hackers book, which we mentioned before we started recording. But as I started, one of the things that I walked away from back in 2004 was going to any conferences. I was a consultant of billable resources. I was rarely allowed to go out and play and go to conferences. And frankly, back then there weren't that many hacker security conferences anyway, but I'd sort of run the gamut and I wasn't learning anything. And most of the time I'd sit in a talk and say, wow, I could have explained that a whole lot better. The guy should have said this. The I should have said that. And it was just frustrating. So I just walked away from everything. So getting back to going to work for Tenable and being asked to sort of go out and become a spokesperson, an evangelist in the community, I started going to hacker conferences again. And of course, there's hacker conferences practically every weekend these days. And I started noticing a theme as I would sit and listen to people giving talks. And I went back to, with sort of a healthy curiosity, gee, how's the industry changed in the 15 years since I've been to one of these conferences?
Yeah.
And I very quickly learned, well, not a whole lot. It started with the very first hacker conference that I went to was DerbyCon. I want to say four or five. I forget which number it was, but you can look it up. Ed Scotus was giving the keynote. I had not met Ed Scotus at that point, and his keynote was entitled "How to Give the World's Best Pen Test." And I'm like, oh, cool. I'm gonna sit and listen and find out how the world has changed. And as I was sitting and listening to him, the first thing I was listening for was, okay, he's going to define a pen test, right? Nope, he never defined it. I was like, well, at least talk about the goals or objectives of a pen test. Nope, never did that either. So I kind of walked away from it kind of frustrated because I was like, wow, that talk really sucked. And I say this, I have since had conversations with Ed, and we've had a discussion about this very talk, and he largely agreed with my observations of his talk. Although he did, he gave me a little bit of, his spin on things in terms of, he kind of assumed that people were sort of on the same page in terms of sort of basic understanding, but that's a different story. The story I'm warming up to is, as I was going around to the conferences, I was hearing this common theme emerging from all sorts of different speakers. And it was something along the lines of, all the mere mortals and humans or muggles or users and other people are stupid. Why don't they listen to us? We're the only smart people. We know how wrong things are. We know how broken things are. We know how to break things. We know how to do everything. And at some point I was sitting there, and it was one specific talk in general, and I won't say who the person was because I have yet to speak to them personally, which I still want to do someday. But at some point I said, if you agree that you're the smartest person in the room and you know what's wrong with everything and your organization or your customer is not changing, at some point you might need to reflect and ask if you yourself aren't the problem.
Yeah.
And so one of the talks that I gave a couple years ago, I had been kind of wanting to do it anyway, but I wanted to give a talk on just how to communicate with customers, how to get information from them, teach them, get them to a point of understanding, and it was really how to do persuasive speech. If you ever took the college course and you had to do sorts of different types of speeches, and persuasive speech is where you're trying to get somebody to change their mind or buy something or make a decision, which is 99% of what our business is. Some of it's education, but a lot of it in terms of trying to make a difference or make a change or make an impact means you got to get people to either change their behaviors or buy something. Mm-hmm. So I ended up putting this talk together called The Art of the Jedi Mind Trick. And it was really directly targeted at a lot of the speakers that I saw in the industry that were just doing a really poor job of communicating, in my opinion, what they were understanding. I even went to talks that were recognizing, well, communication's a big problem in this business, so this is what you need to do. You need to dumb it down. I'm like, well, if you're going to call it dumb it down, you're already making a value judgment on the other person. Yep. So let's try a different approach, and so on and so forth.
That's really funny.
Violation of one of the first rules of persuasive argument.
So it's really funny that you tell that story because it was a tiny little conference in Bloomberg, Pennsylvania that I went to that made me decide to give my first ever conference talk because a person with 1 year of experience got up on stage and gave a state of the industry talk where he basically shit all over everybody and every end user that existed.
Right.
And he ran into me afterward and he's like, what'd you think? And I gave him some polite and constructive feedback, and he goes, no, I'm confident in my findings, and then he walked away. I was like, well, fuck, like I've been doing this 10 years. Like, I suppose I could probably get up and talk if like this is the quality of conversation. And like, that's what led me into the whole thing.
And multiply that by 3 or 4 and imagine how I feel.
Oh yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what led me into deciding that I was comfortable to do this. But
Right.
because we have a huge communication problem. Like, we are not good at translating the right thing to what people actually give a shit about. Like,
Well, but it's deeper than that, because a lot of my audience, which is often, companies and organizations that have to do PCI, they don't know that they should be worried about something, and in a lot of ways they don't even care. They just security, blah blah blah. I don't understand it. Just tell me what I have to do to get the box checked, to get compliant, to get my ROC, my report on compliance, whatever. Just make it go away. And in a lot of ways, that's true of humanity. We tend to not like to think. We don't want to have to make decisions. We like everything done for us. So there's sociological and theological underpinnings. I don't think we're unique in that respect. But suffice it to say that we're poor communicators, and to go around and try to explain to people how they need to improve themselves, and give them practical ways of actually trying to accomplish it. That's what I set out to do with the talk, and the talk became I've given the talk in the form of workshops several times, and eventually I actually recorded a short course at a company called Cybersecurity. So you can actually go take my 2-hour introductory course on effective communication skills, the art of the Jedi mind trick, at cybersecurity.it.
And we will link that in the description for everybody.
Yeah, we can find the link. But so there's that element, and it's funny because I did that several years ago, but as I've become more of a public figure, as it were, in the industry, I meet a lot of people that have never heard of it. You did that? I didn't know that existed. Which, the limited either attention span or just the way social media is set up so that you're only seeing what happened in the last 30, 40 seconds anyway. How do you get those messages out to people? Well, and that's part of what I'm trying to do in my role in life right now, just trying to get back to the community and trying to educate the community, is in as many ways and different venues as possible. Just talk to people, and get, my goal is ultimately get them to think that maybe there's a different way. Maybe the way we've been doing it isn't the right way or the best way. Maybe there's a better way. And I've had people ask me on many occasions, how did you get your start in the industry, or what made you decide to become this or do that? And the nearest I can figure out, because I ended up working at NSA, and the way that I got hired at NSA is almost proverbially the I solved a puzzle in the back of the magazine and sent it in, and like, ooh, you've got the stuff that we want. But I mean, it's not much different from that. I went to Fort Meade after turning in an application. I was invited up and spent a couple days doing a series of aptitude tests, and scored well enough on the tests that apparently I had the right psyche or mindset or skills. But the psyche and the mindset or skills that I had were based on the fact that I grew up in a house where we loved to do puzzles and quiz ourselves on trivial information and just facts and history and general knowledge about all sorts of subjects. But I grew up enjoying doing puzzles. Mm-hmm. And I inherited that from my parents, my father. My father was a physicist. I fortunately never took a physics class, and I don't think it was intentional. It just seemed hard. So I tried to avoid it, and I did. Doesn't mean I don't completely understand physics. I can talk physics a little bit, but I never had to take a physics class. And all the people I knew that had to take physics, they seemed to really suffer in that class. And I was very happy that I didn't have to do it. Sorry, Dad.
Now you're talking about giving back to the community, isn't it? And you have a show yourself, so it's not just talks, it's not just people you meet, but you also have a the show that you're on too sometimes, right?
Yes, actually, I am. One of the uh, things that I fell into during my time at Tenable is I was working with a guy, a couple guys actually. One was Paul Asadorian, and at some point I figured out that he had a webcast podcast that he did. And one of the people that worked at Tenable, still works at Tenable, that was part of this webcast, Jack Daniel. And, somewhere along the line, I found myself, becoming a guest on Paul's Security Weekly. And, the occasional showing up and doing it turned into more of a regular spot. And when I left Tenable, or when Tenable left me, I asked Paul, I said, am I still allowed to do the podcast? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. You can stay here as long as you want. And Paul had actually left Security Weekly around the same time anyway. So I ended up doing Paul's Security Weekly. I'm a co-host on that, and it's been 5 years now that I've been doing that. Last fall, after many, many times of saying, hey, Paul, we should do a PCI-focused episode, he finally came back to me and said, why don't we just do an entire show on compliance? Because that's not an area that we really cover. So why don't we do a whole compliance-based podcast, and why don't you be the host of it? So I am now the host of what we dubbed Security and Compliance Weekly.
That's fantastic. And how's that going so far? I haven't listened to an episode yet, but I remember that you were talking about that at DerbyCon, and it was just getting started then. So how's that been going as a podcaster to podcaster?
So far so good. I think if you're not familiar with Paul's Security Weekly, we're a network of webcasts now. We've actually got 7 different shows, and Paul's Security Weekly being the flagship is much more stereotypical Wayne's World, kind of just guys getting together and shooting the shit, and we do it over cocktails and beer and wine and whatever's in the bar at that time, and cigars, and we're actually allowed to smoke in the studio, which is really cool. So it built itself on the reputation of people that were just kind of cutting through all the noise and all the marketing fluff, and what's really good and what's really bad, what's exciting and new, and what looks cool and interesting, and sort of the attempt was to cut through all the fluff. And doing it in a very ribald manner, very often not suitable for work. Whereas the other shows are a little bit more professional, a little bit more, you can listen to it and not be afraid to have it turned on in your office type of thing. And the shows cover the gamut of Enterprise Security Weekly, large companies, Business Security Weekly, focus more on how do you tackle this for small to mid-sized companies or even startups. Application Security Weekly, focused on, strangely enough, applications. Tradecraft Security Weekly, getting more into the hardcore, pen testing, red teaming, hacker type of techniques and technologies and cool things that people are working on. We do we used to call it Hack Naked News. We've rebranded it to Security Weekly News because we're a grown-up company now. And
even though the Hack Naked shirts are still
it's still our registered trademark. And then I lost count of whether I've gotten them all, and then Security and Compliance Weekly being the last one to kind of round everything out.
Yeah,
so
that's
I
really
mention all that because we're trying to cover all the bases and trying to cover all the interests. So how's it going? Very well. And I think one of the reasons why it's going very well is we have a lot of very loyal listeners that are always looking for a little bit more. And so they have gravitated over to the new podcast. I'm not holding myself to, we know exactly what we're doing yet. We're just trying to feel things out. We obviously resemble the main show, but we don't want to be a carbon copy of the show. So things that are sort of regular happenings on the main show, we're not necessarily duplicating. We're trying to figure out what our unique, sort of regular occurrences will be. We do 2 segments, a half an hour each. We've been doing a lot of interviews. One of the benefits of the status I've achieved or have been afforded in this community is I've gotten a chance to meet a lot of people that are more than willing to get on the air and help out. So we've had a lot of really cool conversations so far with people. And my goal, one of my goals for the show is to try to reach sort of the compliance consulting side of the world that largely doesn't know that the hacker community exists. I'm generalizing a little bit, but there's a lot of, I lived in that world for a long time. My first day on the job, I sat down at an all hands marketing meeting next to this older guy with this really long beard who I'd never heard of before. And it was Jack Daniel. And he introduced me to everybody that's everybody in the industry. And for the most part, I had no idea who these people were other than they were famous for something. So they're like, we have no idea who you are. And I'm like, that's okay. I have no idea who you are either, even though I know I'm supposed to. It's being a big fish in a small pond, we're legends in our own mind, however you want to phrase it. But there's a lot of really smart people on both sides, and I want to get them together. So I'm trying to figure out how to attract that side of the world, the compliance consulting advisory side of the world, and expose them more to the hacker community, while at the same time exposing the hacker community to the compliance side of the world and compliance in general, and help them to understand that it's not a dirty word. It can be abused and misused. Don't get me wrong, but it can also be a very healthy vehicle for trying to help get the point across and trying to get the message across of security. And frankly, most companies in the world, they're only going to do in terms of security what they have to do, regardless of what tell them.
I like to say to our GRC people all the time that they give me teeth.
Oh, absolutely.
That being said, when you get your fill of threat detection and response from us, because oddly enough, the reason this exists is actually oddly similar to what you're talking about with Security and Compliance Weekly.
Yep.
Like there weren't a lot of people talking about threat detection and response.
Sure.
And we really wanted to present that idea and concept. But once you get your fill from threat detection and response with us, there's 7 other awesome shows, including Jeff's, that you can check out over at Security Weekly.
Yes.
For those that can't get enough, always more.
It really covers the whole gamut. New podcasts are starting every day, which to me is so awesome.
It is.
That like more and more people are starting to put themselves out there and starting to talk about stuff and starting to share their experiences. I just think that's amazing.
Well, and we were talking a little bit before we went on the air about what we were going to talk about, and one of the things that I think we both agreed on, or all 3 of us agreed on, is sort of the lack of education on the basics or fundamentals, if you will.
Oh yeah.
And what I was getting, having sort of been in this community at the beginning and then been away from it for so long and coming back and being told go give talks at conferences, I very much had I think people call it the Imposter Syndrome. I didn't refer to it as that, but I very much had the attitude of, geez, what do I have to contribute to this community? I've been away from the technology for so many years, but I pretty quickly learned that what I take for granted as common knowledge, most people have never experienced or never learned about it. And I sort of, and I don't say this in a prideful way, but I've had a lot of experiences, and I've had a long time of a lot of experiences. And I think there's benefit to being able to communicate with somebody that's kind of seen it all and done it all and been there from the very beginning. And there's nothing magical in what I've seen and done. It's just everything that you're discovering is new, young person. I guarantee you it's been thought of and done before, and probably numerous times in classified and unclassified ways. And hopefully I can tell you about the unclassified ways.
One of the things that still to this day amazes me is I've had the benefit of, and I've been teaching like introduction to malware analysis for a long time, and like it's very introductory because I'm a shitty malware analyst, like I admit. But I used to do like malware triage as part of my job, and I did it at a couple hacker spaces to crowded rooms, and people liked it. And finally last year, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to submit this to a conference. I've done it at 2 conferences now, B-Sides Nova last weekend being one of them, right?
Right.
Packed room. B-Sides Nova, 74-person room, over 100 people in the room. Like, here's me thinking, like, I'm going to go give this at a HackerCon and somebody's going to laugh me off the stage because I'm an idiot.
Right.
But, like, there's so much desire for that kind of content and that introductory level content at these conferences because there's so much shit in InfoSec that, like, most people barely touch a sliver of it. And any chance that they get to get an intro to another piece that they haven't seen, like, people jump at. Like, I really want to see more intro stuff. Not just look at how cool
I had similar, thoughts and misgivings going into it. I'm still waiting for somebody to stand up and call bullshit on me or
yeah, me too.
Throw the schmoocon ball at me. And what I do get is people come up and saying, "Oh, thanks. You really enlightened me. I never thought of it like that before." And as long as people seem to be getting something out of me, I'm going to keep talking.
No, we have a lack, and I mean, it's just my opinion. We have a lack of teachers and an overabundance of show-offs. And I'm trying to say that in as not as mean a way as like it probably sounds, but like I want more teachers.
Well, and that goes back to like one of our first conversations that we had at Derby about my experience, right? Like that was my experience here on the West Coast was a lot of show-offs, a lot of people who were doing the cutting edge pen tester stuff. And here I am, like brand new SOC analyst, like just finished my degree after taking a 10-year break from school, trying to figure out where to go, what to do, realizing that it's I got like 10 elephants of information before me and just trying to figure out where to start. And it wasn't there until, got around people like you, Understudy, and a bunch of the people at DerbyCon. There was a ton of show-offs that actually dissuaded me for almost 5 years from engaging.
Well, and that's unfortunate, but that's also what we celebrate and what we hold up in this community. And it's not unique to this community, believe me. But what is sexy? What sells a conference? It's somebody's got to come in and drop an O-Day or reveal some new way of doing things, and there isn't enough. And it's it's not consistent. There are certain conferences that do intentionally try to get the older person or get somebody telling stories or telling the soft side of things, not necessarily the tech thing. I mean, there've been tons of talks that I've seen on like this whole concept of lack of communication skills, and then they do a horrible job of doing the talk because they have horrible communication skills. I mean, I went to a seminar one time. I think it was also at Derby. And I don't mean to pick on Derby, but
it's all right. It doesn't exist anymore.
A couple of the guys that are known as some of the really sharp guys, popular guys, very frequent conference speakers. They were giving this seminar on how to hack your organization or how to hack your boss or something like that. And the concept was all about communicating. And, I liked the concept, but they were basically saying, you got to learn how to play your boss. And I'm like, no, you got to learn how to speak their language.
Yeah.
So, and one of the examples they gave was, dumbing it down. And then they gave an example. And they proceeded, I don't remember what the example was, but they proceeded in their quote unquote dumbing it down or simplifying it, continued to use jargon that only a tech person would know. They continued to use acronyms and phrases that you have to know something about it to know something about it or to know what they're talking about. I'm like, guys, yes, I agree with the principle. You're failing miserably at what you're trying to do. And you don't even know it. Yeah. So I set out to try to do it differently and to make it fun and sexy so people would accept it as a talk. I threw a Star Wars theme on it and call it Jedi Mind Tricks. And it worked.
I mean, we are easily swayed by Star Wars.
This is the talk you want to hear.
Yeah, we are easily swayed by Star Wars.
Yeah. And squirrels.
Oh, yeah, definitely squirrels. Where?
What?
Where? What? Where?
Hold on. I'm looking out the window. But all that kind of brings up another point that we also talked about at the beginning of something. Our conversation there at Derby, how you started bringing up about how it's now time to pass the torch at these conferences, right? So we've talked about the communication, just some specific stuff there, but like the people who are recognized now are getting older and probably want to stop doing it and spend time with their family.
Yeah, there's many reasons why, there should be a passing of the torch. I mean, I fully admire the young people that are wrapping their heads around the new technologies. The whole concept of Dockers and passwordless authentication, and again, it's a lot of buzzwords sometimes, but I'll grant you, there's new technology. The network doesn't exist today like it existed 20, 30 years ago, or even 10 or 15 years ago. But the concepts, the security concepts, I don't think have fundamentally changed. It's just how you execute them has changed. So I think there needs to be a passing of the torch, if you will. There continues to be a need for training and learning from the past, and maybe revisiting the past and where we've come from to try to help understanding how to apply it in today's modern, fast, overloaded technological world that we live in. Mm-hmm. For the people, I'm old and I don't care. I hate technology. That's my big dark secret. I would walk away from it if I could. But for the people that are into it and they're passionate about it and they love it, I'm like, go for it. If you love doing it, get as much out of it as you can. But find somebody, and for the time being, it could be me or peers that are close to my age and other like-minded people that are trying to impart some sort of wisdom. Basically old people. Onto the younger people to try to connect the dots and to provide more meat and context to what all the cool stuff they're doing, and also hopefully help them avoid some of the pitfalls and mistakes that we see over and over again being made because we believe as a industry, if not society, that technology is going to solve all our problems. I don't believe it does. While technology in terms of security solutions, I don't believe are technically solutions. They should be called tools. They might help with one problem, but they generally create at least one more, if not more. This is actually one of the I told you I've been trying to figure out how to attract the compliance consulting side of the world into being listeners on my podcasts. One of the ways that I think I see a difference between these two communities is the really smart people that are on the compliance consulting advisory side. They seem to really, really know the technology side of things in terms of capabilities and what's the better product within a family of products. Mm-hmm. And to varying degrees, they're very bright, and I don't mean to disparage them, but I think they're limited because they haven't seen the dark side and just seen what you can do negatively with things. Mm-hmm. They tend to believe the marketing slicks and the advertising and the web pages and documentation about the things, and they know the product side of the world very well, and they communicate that.
That's true on all of the sides, by the way. I think many people.
Well, maybe it's not unique, but they have that almost exclusively, and they understand to some degree the compliance and regulatory requirements.
Sure,
but they know this is what you need to get to meet the requirement, mm-hmm. as much as this is what you need to do to meet.
Oh yeah. Also, I just want to throw something out there as a disclaimer.
Sure. Okay.
The Detections podcast does not endorse loitering around old folks' homes or retirement communities, nor harassing elderly individuals for information and or wisdom.
Especially now during the nationwide quarantine.
Correct. Just wanted to throw that out there. But no, one of the things that I find when I do interviews and stuff with people is that the young guys, like a lot of them, they tend to be so tool focused, which is really interesting because when you start to dive past the tool and start to like talk about the technology, and I say that as a relatively young person, but still, you start to dive past that and start to talk about the concepts or like how technology works, not necessarily just what the tool is. Like people fall right the fuck apart really fast.
Well, I can give you a good anecdotal example. Early last year, I went to, actually it was B-Sides Nova. The keynote last year was Ian Coldwater.
I remember that keynote. She
is brilliant. She's amazing. She knows Dockers. And she made a statement in her keynote at B-Sides about, she made a disparaging remark about PCI, but it was predicated on, PCI requires network segmentation, and, they have this vision of the network 20 years ago, and it's just not done that way these days. So silly PCI, they're behind in the times. And I took her aside afterwards and I said, oh, by the way, PCI does not require segmentation. She's like, it doesn't? I'm like, no, it's desirable, it's recommended, but it's not a requirement. So I saw her then again, probably a month later. She was, I think it was also a keynote at B-Sides Orlando, and PCI was not mentioned in her talk. It was much the same talk, but she had updated it and she had taken out the PCI part. But then we had a chance to sit together for probably about 3 hours. And I said to her, look, I know PCI. I don't know containers and the whole new way of doing things. You know the whole new way of doing things, but you don't know PCI. Let's walk through the PCI data security standard, and I'll tell you what PCI requires. You tell me if it applies or doesn't apply, makes sense, doesn't make sense, and how you would do it in your world of containers and Kubernetes. And we did that for about 3 hours. And at the end of the day, we were both in agreement that all of PCI still applies, even in the containerized Kubernetes type of world. And it's hard to do it right, and it's hard to do it, let's call it securely or PCI compliant. I use those terms interchangeably because I think they're synonymous. And it takes work, and it's hard to do because it's new technology that nobody understands, and they don't get trained and educated on how to configure and use all this whiz-bang new technology, which is what Ian very much is about. And I'm all for her going out and promoting it, but she now does it with a deeper context of how to make it make sense for people that are using it, that also have to do regulatory compliance requirements like PCI. And she can help them say, this is why you need to do it. Oh, well, in that case, we should do it. Maybe not for the right reason, security, but for the reason that they believe is the right reason, which is compliance.
Compliance, yeah.
It is, after all, a Jedi mind trick.
That's how you get teeth.
That's right.
I give GRC a bunch of shit, but like that's how you get teeth. Oh,
yeah, that's the.
You can loop.
I was
going to say
that's the business justification, right? That's how you start to make that language translation from what we in this information security field talk to how senior management can relate to it.
Yeah, when you can loop your goals into compliance requirements, like there's teeth.
Yep, absolutely. And I literally, the most hostile people that I ever encountered in my years as a QSA were the security folks at the customers I went to. And I usually had to figure out some way to prove that I wasn't just the blankety blank auditor that didn't know shit. I had to, I didn't walk in with my pedigree. I would just engage them and, either question them or question them enough to get them to think and actually answer the questions that were being asked, or get beyond they'd been instructed to only answer specifically the questions that have been asked. Mm-hmm. Again, whole bunch of Jedi mind tricks, but get them to the point where I would literally tell them, look, you don't know it, but I'm your best friend right now because I have this magic cape that I'm wearing. You can't see it, but I will guarantee you know what you want, you know what you need to do your job in this organization. And if you haven't been getting it, tell me about it. I will find a way to put PCI on it, and I will guarantee you will magically get what you've been asking for. Try me.
If you, as a defender, all the defenders who listen, if you take away one thing from tonight, or whenever you listen to this, it could be in the morning, I don't know. Well, that's your business. But if you take away one thing, be friends with your GRC person. They will give you teeth. They will get you what you need.
Yeah, I think teeth is optimistic. They will get you what you need.
Sure.
Yeah.
They're a means to an end, and that's where I would try to convince people. Take advantage of the fact that I'm here. Don't try to run from me. Use me, because we are, after all, one big team working together for the same goal.
Yes. Same goal.
Yep. And then, some took more convincing than others, but I won most of them over the years that I
yeah. We used to have a slogan at one of the companies that I used to work for. That slogan was one team. They took that slogan so far, they used to put it on mouse pads. So, like, my mouse pad said one team. So whenever, and I'm not going to say the company, but still, whenever I used to have a problem with somebody or somebody wasn't playing by the team, I'd get up, and I had a team of like 19 people, right? I'd get up, I'd pick up my mouse pad, and I'd start walking out the room. And one day somebody stopped me. They go, why are you taking your mouse pad with you? I said, I'm about to go slap somebody in the face with a one-team mouse pad.
Which I cannot endorse as a common method of trying to win that person.
We as a podcast do not necessarily endorse physical violence or slapping people with a mouse pad, nor did I ever actually do it. However, it did make for a very amusing joke.
Absolutely. You use it wisely. I had one off-color experience where I was working with a compromised entity, one of the famously breached companies from the mid to late 2000s. And I was there at the first meeting. We were brought in as a QSA team to help them get back on the good list, on the compliant list. Clearly, they were not compliant because they suffered this months-long breach. And the guy that was their security manager, who, bless his heart, he'd only been on the job for like 2 weeks before the breach was discovered. So he was in it up to his eyeballs. Cocky young guy. He's going through the whole network environment, the whole topology, the whole architecture of the whole organization. And at the time, there was a rule that if there wasn't 500,000 or more credit cards stored on like a file server or database, it didn't have to be included in the PCI assessment process. And so under those auspices, he showed us where their data center was. It was a different city, different state, whole different major operation. And he said, but we don't have to go there because there isn't, we checked and there isn't that much card data there. And my boss at the time, who was only half listening because he was like reading his email or something, he was just kind of nodding his head. I'm looking at him. I'm looking at the guy. I'm looking at him, looking at the guy. And I'm like, and I finally said, okay, hold on. Stop. You guys are compromised, entity. This is kind of a big deal. You may be right, but as far as I'm concerned, your posture right now should be bent over, firmly grasping your ankles. And he was like, oh my. I said, yeah, we need to go there. We can't make any of these assumptions. We're on the hook for getting you back on the good list. We got to look everywhere. And guess where we went, and guess where we found a whole lot of credit card data.
Yeah.
You guessed it. It was the call center.
That center, yeah.
So, I am not someone that has any industry certifications because I sort of grew up doing it, and I came from a crew that we eschewed certifications. But the one certification that I have, and it's on my LinkedIn profile if you want to look for it, is an honorary certification that this gentleman gave to me at the conclusion of the engagement. I have it up it's stuck in the side of my whiteboard. I'm staring at it right now. I am a certified application security specialist. That is to say, I'm a certified ass. And when he gave it to me, he's like, I hope you're not offended by this. I said, oh, no, I will carry this as a badge of honor. I've been carrying it for the last 12 or 13 years.
It gets proudly displayed.
Absolutely.
So I think we're going to move to the part of our show, Jeff, that we talked about with actually providing a detection for people. And you said you had something in mind as a thing that we do. So we feel like sharing.
Yeah. So I actually alluded to it earlier in our conversation. Where I talked about what I loved about PCI is that you can't hide stuff because you can show the documentation and everything. But at the end of the day, we're going to sit down with a sample of systems and look to see if you're doing what you say you're doing. Happened to me today. Customer, we're looking at their database schema. We're scrolling through the list of columns, field names. And, as they're scrolling by the screen, I'm seeing two columns, one labeled track 1 and one labeled track 2. Now, for background, in the world of credit card security, most people are familiar with a credit card. It's got a what's called a primary account number, the 16 digits. If you ever do a website where you have to give them the security code, the three digits on the back or the 4 digits on the front, if it's an Amex, that's called it's called different things because of the different card brands, but generically it's called sensitive authentication data. It's supposed to be designed to prove that you have an actual physical card in your hand, not a stolen credit card number. So it's the crown jewel of credit card data, and it's not allowed to be stored in any way, shape, or form, encrypted or not, anywhere at any time after a sale's been concluded. That all of that information that you see on a card is also on the magnetic stripe, or it's in the chip if you have a chip card. And there's on the magnetic stripe, there's two fields, two tracks of electronic data, and they exist for different formats because of the different age of cash registers and point of sale system where you go and buy something at a grocery store or gas station or whatever. So the sensitive authentication data is a particular field within the track, and it's not allowed. It also is not allowed to be stored. So when I see things like, and this has happened more times than I can count over my years in PCI, where I see a database schema that's got a field labeled track, I immediately want to look at it, even though the DBA is telling me as he's opening it, oh, we don't store anything there. We don't capture anything there. Well, let's look at it. And so they open it up and they do a query, and poof, what do you know? There's track data.
It's got data.
Yep. So all that to say is, in terms of what you like to call detections, I've just been noodling over this just for the last couple weeks. I say it very generically, just to pay attention. But in military terms, it's trust but verify. Look at stuff. Don't take anybody's word for it. In particular, if anybody ever says, and this has been true since day one, at least in the commercial world of my career, if somebody says they're not doing something, they are. If they're not capturing data, if they're not storing data, we don't ever take that. We don't do that. Yeah, they are. I mean, it's almost 100% that that's been true. So pay attention to what people are saying, and then go and validate it and verify it. Don't take their word for anything. Just open it up and look, and educate yourself to know what you're looking at.
Yeah, and that track that you were talking about looking for that secure data that's not to be stored, that's good. That's something that I didn't even know. So that's something that's going to get added to my little toolbox when I have to go deal with that stuff.
Well, it's not there and you don't find it. But I was telling this customer today, and I've told I don't know how many customers over the years, if you don't have a column that accepts that type of data in the first place, you're a lot less likely to capture it. and nobody ever believes me. And time again, I'm like, sorry guys, it's there. I had it happen to a customer a few years ago. They swore up and down they didn't have it, but they were encrypting the field. So when we saw all of a sudden data in this column, we had to go find somebody that had the decryption function, and they had to open up and figure it out. And so we're standing at this guy's cubicle, and as he's fumbling around trying to get it running, and I was talking to my point of contact, the guy, my escort, and I said, when he opens that up and it's tracked data, I'm just going to leave because I know you guys are going to have a long night ahead of you. He popped it. It was, in this case, it was the 3 or 4 digits, the CVV is what they call it. And I said, see you guys tomorrow. So
as
eyes wide open, I guess. And what I've been noodling over to just sort of round it out, and this is not my original thought. Somebody said it to me on Twitter a couple weeks ago, and I wish I could find the guy to give him proper credit. But we were talking about vulnerability management tools, vulnerability scanning tools, and this person that I was somebody that was part of the thread said something about their mind. I'm like, that's beautiful. My mind is my vulnerability scanning tool, or something to that effect.
Huh.
That's a life lesson that I mean, it's very true for me. My classic training is as an analyst, so I analyze things. I look at things. I try to see what's wrong with things. I try to find the logic errors. Tell me how this works. Show me how this works. Prove to me that it works. And I'm not looking for anything specific. I'm just kind of observing. Whoa, wait a minute. You said that, but I'm seeing this. Oh, yeah, I never thought of it like that.
Yeah.
It's more art than science, but it's my mind is my vulnerability scanning tool of choice.
There you go.
Back to Jedi mind tricks.
Right. So as we wrap things up, and Exile, I'll hand it to you to take us out. But a couple things. First off, Jeff, thank you for your time tonight. This has been awesome.
Very much so.
Secondly,
Absolutely.
to everybody out there, stay safe and don't drink Corona beer because you might get sick. Like, that's a thing, by the way. Like, 60% of people that were polled think that they can get sick from drinking Corona beer.
I want to know, like, the details of that polling. Like, did they only stick to, like, Talladega Speedway when they did this, or did they involve the West Coast?
But at this point, better safe than sorry.
Sampling bias is always a thing.
All right, Exile, take us out.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This was Jeff Mann on Detections Podcast. So remember to take this information to go forth and find badness.